The year that will separate the focused from the distracted. There is a moment, and most men know it, when you look up from the noise of your life and realize that years have passed, and you are exactly where you were. The job is the same. The body is the same. The conversations, the complaints, the small frustrations, the same. You have been busy every single day, but you have not been growing. You have been moving, but you have not been advancing. That moment of recognition is not a condemnation. It is an invitation. It is the Stoic call to attention, the ancient alarm that Marcus Aurelius described when he wrote that a man who is always on the verge of living never actually lives. The year 2026 is not just another rotation of the calendar. For the man who is watching this right now, it is a turning point. It is the year you stop being pulled by everything and everyone around you and start being driven by something inside of you. The Stoics called that inner force your ruling reason, your hegemonikon, the sovereign part of you that no circumstance, no person, and no failure can reach unless you surrender it. This is the year you stop surrendering it. The world does not reward the scattered. It never has. History is not filled with the names of men who were available to every distraction, agreeable to every demand, and present at every social gathering. History remembers the focused, the disciplined, the men who went quiet when the world got loud, who went inward when everyone else went outward, and who built something real while everyone else was performing the appearance of productivity. The Stoics understood this centuries before neuroscience caught up. They understood that attention is not just a mental resource, it is a moral resource. Where you place your attention reveals what you truly value. And if you value your growth, then your attention must go there first, last, and always. This script is not a motivational speech. Motivation fades. You have heard 1,000 motivational speeches and they have carried you through exactly as long as the feeling lasted. What you are about to receive is a philosophy. A framework. A way of thinking that, once installed, changes how you see every single day, how you wake up, how you respond to setbacks, how you spend your hours, and how you measure your progress. Stoicism is not soft. It is not a collection of pretty quotes to hang on your wall. It is a warrior's code for the interior life. And if you take it seriously, truly seriously, it will produce the most significant growth year of your adult life. What growth actually means to a Stoic. Before you can pursue growth, you must be brutally honest about what you are actually chasing. Most men confuse growth with acquisition. They think growth means earning more, accumulating more, achieving more external markers of success. And while none of those things are necessarily wrong, the Stoics would tell you that chasing them without first building the interior life is like painting the outside of a house that is rotting from within. It looks impressive until it collapses. True Stoic growth begins inside. It begins with what Epictetus called the work of philosophy, the daily, disciplined effort to bring your character into alignment with your values. Growth, in the Stoic framework, is the closing of the gap between who you are in your weakest moments and who you aspire to be in your strongest ones. It is the narrowing of the distance between your ideals and your actions. Marcus Aurelius spent years as the most powerful man in the known world, commanding armies, governing millions, and navigating political treachery at every turn. And yet the document he left behind, the Meditations, is entirely focused on the interior. He does not write about his conquests. He writes about his temptations, his frustrations, his failures to live up to his own standards. He writes about waking up when he did not want to, about controlling his tongue when he wanted to rage, about treating difficult people with patience when everything in him wanted to dismiss them. That is what growth looked like to Marcus Aurelius. Not the accumulation of power, but the refinement of the man wielding it. That is the standard this year demands of you. Seneca was even more direct. He wrote that the primary art of life is the development of the soul, that a man who has not worked on himself has wasted whatever else he has built. And Seneca knew something about external success. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He understood that external success without interior development produces a particular kind of misery, the misery of a man who has everything and still feels empty. Growth, then, is not a destination. It is a direction. It is the daily commitment to becoming more disciplined, more clear-eyed, more patient, more courageous, more useful than you were the day before. When you understand growth this way, every single day becomes an opportunity. Even the hard days. Especially the hard days. The Stoics also understood that true growth is visible in behavior, not in declarations. You cannot announce your way to a better version of yourself. You cannot post your goals on social media and call that progress. Growth shows up in what you do at 5 in the morning when no one is watching. It shows up in how you respond when someone disrespects you. It shows up in whether you honor your commitments when breaking them would be more convenient. It shows up in the quality of your attention, whether you are truly present in the work that matters or merely pretending to be engaged while your mind drifts to 100 irrelevant distractions. Real growth is quiet. It accumulates in the dark. It announces itself only through results that cannot be faked. The philosophy of single-minded focus. The Stoics were not anti-ambition. They were not monks who turned away from the world and retreated into caves. They were senators, emperors, soldiers, slaves, merchants, men embedded in the full weight of human life. What distinguished them from other men was not what they pursued but how they pursued it. They pursued with focus. With intentionality. With a disciplined refusal to let the trivial consume the time and energy that belonged to the essential. Epictetus called this the practice of the dichotomy of control, the rigorous, daily habit of distinguishing between what is within your power and what is not, and then investing all of your energy exclusively in the former. This is the philosophical foundation of single-minded focus, and it is devastatingly effective. Consider what you are actually doing when you spend your mental energy on things outside your control. You are draining the reservoir that was meant for your work, your growth, your relationships, your craft. Every minute you spend worrying about what other people think of you is a minute you have stolen from the man you are trying to become. Every hour you spend monitoring social media for validation is an hour that your competitor, the disciplined, quiet version of a man you could have been, is spending on skills, on health, on building something real. The Stoics were not interested in being poetic about this. They were interested in being practical. The focused man wins. Not because the universe rewards virtue with prizes, but because focus compounds. And compounding, over years, produces results that seem miraculous to men who never learned to focus. Marcus Aurelius described it this way. He wrote that if you find yourself distracted by the judgments of others, turn your gaze back to yourself. Ask what nature you have been given. Ask what work is yours to do. And then go do it without apology, without performance, and without waiting for permission. This is the practice. Not a grand philosophical gesture made once, but a daily, hourly redirection of your attention back to what matters. Single-minded focus is not the absence of distraction. Distraction will always be present. Single-minded focus is the practiced skill of returning, again and again, to your work, your growth, your purpose, without self-recrimination for having drifted, and without the illusion that this time you have mastered it forever. You have not mastered it. You are practicing it. That is the distinction that makes all the difference. Seneca wrote one of the most powerful observations in all of ancient philosophy when he said that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. Read that again. The problem is not that life is short. The problem is that most men spend their lives on things that do not belong to them, things that other people want from them, things that habit has normalized, things that feel urgent but are not important. The man who reclaims his time, who decides, with stoic clarity, what he is here to do and then protects that mission from every competing demand, that man does not experience life as short. He experiences it as full, as purposeful, as a story worth telling. Why most men fail to grow even when they want to. Here is a truth that most self-help content will not tell you because it does not feel good to hear. Most men fail to grow not because they lack talent, opportunity, or resources. They fail because they have not made a real decision. They have made a preference. There is a catastrophic difference between the two. A preference says, I would like to grow, if it isn't too uncomfortable, if it doesn't cost me too much, and if the results come quickly enough to keep me interested. A decision says, I am growing. Full stop. Whatever it costs, however long it takes, regardless of how I feel on any given morning. The Stoics lived in the realm of decision. They had no patience for the man who wished for virtue but was not willing to endure the friction required to build it. And friction, real, meaningful friction, is exactly what growth demands. Epictetus, who was born a slave and lived in actual chains before earning his freedom, had no tolerance for men who complained about the difficulty of self-improvement, while living in relative comfort. He taught that the obstacle is not something standing between you and growth. The obstacle is the material of growth itself. The resistance you feel is not a signal that you are on the wrong path. It is a signal that you are on the right one. When your body resists getting out of bed, that resistance is the classroom. When your mind resists sitting down to do difficult work, that resistance is the gymnasium. When your ego resists admitting that you were wrong, that resistance is the forge. The men who understand this do not waste time wishing the friction away. They lean into it. The second reason men fail to grow is comparison. This is perhaps the most insidious threat to personal development in the modern world, and the Stoics identified it long before social media existed to weaponize it. Marcus Aurelius wrote specifically about the danger of looking sideways, of measuring your life against someone else's and then feeling either the poisonous inflation of superiority or the equally poisonous deflation of inadequacy. Both responses are growth killers. The man who feels superior stops pushing. The man who feels inferior loses heart. Either way, the comparison has served its only purpose: to pull your attention away from your own work and towards someone else's story. Your growth has nothing to do with anyone else's. Nothing. It is a private contract between you and your own potential. The third reason, and this one cuts deep, is that many men are secretly afraid of their own growth. Not consciously. No man will admit this sitting across a table from you. But in behavior, it is everywhere. The man who starts strong and then self-sabotages just before a breakthrough. The man who sets ambitious goals and then quietly abandons them once they begin to require real sacrifice. The man who surrounds himself with people who keep him small because the discomfort of being the only one growing feels worse than the comfort of standing still together. The Stoics called this the retreat from virtue, the moment when a man, feeling the true cost of becoming who he claims he wants to be, chooses the familiar smallness instead. Recognizing this pattern in yourself is not shameful. It is the beginning of the real work. The morning practice that changes everything. The Stoics were meticulous about how they began their days. This was not incidental. They understood, with an almost modern psychological precision, that the first hours of the morning set the tone for everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius famously began his mornings by reminding himself that he would encounter difficult people, frustrating circumstances, and moments that would test his patience, and then he would prepare his mind for those encounters before leaving his bed. He did not wait to be caught off guard by difficulty. He anticipated it, rehearsed his response to it, and arrived at each day already fortified. This practice, which Stoics called the morning premeditation, is one of the most powerful tools in the entire Stoic arsenal for focused growth. The morning premeditation is not pessimism. It is preparation. There is a profound difference. The pessimist expects the worst and resigns himself to it. The Stoic anticipates challenge and prepares to meet it with virtue. He asks himself, at the start of each day, what will test my patience today? What will tempt me to abandon my discipline? What circumstances might arise that could pull me away from what matters? And then he decides in advance how he will respond. He decides that he will not be reactive. That he will not be petty. That he will not sacrifice his focus for someone else's drama. That he will not let a bad interaction in the morning derail an entire afternoon of meaningful work. By the time the challenge actually arrives, he has already lived through it mentally, and his response comes from clarity rather than reflex. Alongside the premeditation, the Stoics practiced what might be called the morning review of values, a quiet, deliberate inventory of what they stood for and what they were building. Before picking up any tool of the external world, before answering any message, checking any status, or engaging with any demand from outside, they turned inward. They asked, who am I trying to become today? What single action, taken consistently, is closing the gap between who I am and who I am meant to be? What would a man of wisdom, courage, and discipline do with this day? These are not rhetorical questions. They are operational ones. They produce answers that can be acted on immediately. And action, not reflection without action, is what growth requires. If you are not protecting your mornings right now, this year is the year to begin. The world will not protect them for you. The world will fill every unguarded hour with noise, demand, and triviality. The discipline of the morning is yours to build, and no one will build it for you. You do not need 2 hours. You do not need a complex ritual. You need 15 minutes of honest silence, a clear set of priorities, and the decision to begin your day in your own domain before surrendering any of it to anyone else's agenda. The Stoics did not have smartphones to navigate. Their version of morning distraction was the demands of the court, the petitions of citizens, the noise of the city. They protected against it anyway. You can too. Silence as the weapon of the growing man. If you have been following the Stoic Edge for any length of time, subscribe now if you have not, because what we are about to discuss is one of the most underrated and least understood tools in the entire toolkit of personal development. Silence. Not as an absence. Not as passivity. But as an active, strategic, chosen force. The Stoics were deeply invested in the practice of intentional silence, and their reasons were not spiritual or mystical. They were entirely practical. Silence protects your attention. Silence protects your energy. Silence protects the vision you are building from the corrosive effect of other people's opinions, doubts, and smallness. Epictetus taught that the first obligation of the man who is serious about his growth is to control what comes out of his mouth. He understood that there is a direct link between what you speak and what you manifest, not in any metaphysical sense, but in the practical, observable sense that what you talk about shapes what you think about, and what you think about determines where your energy goes. The man who constantly complains is not accidentally stuck. He has trained his mind to see his circumstances through the lens of complaint, and that lens produces nothing but more reasons to complain. The man who announces every goal before achieving it is not building momentum, he is bleeding it. The man who engages in every argument is not seeking truth, he is seeking the temporary relief of having said something rather than having done something. Marcus Aurelius wrote about what he learned from his Stoic teachers regarding speech. He observed that the wise man speaks when silence would be less beneficial and stays quiet when words would produce more noise than clarity. This standard is almost alien in the modern world, where speaking, constantly, voluminously, publicly, is mistaken for intelligence and presence. Social media has made this worse by rewarding the volume of output over the quality of thought. The man who posts 10 times a day is not the man who is growing the most. Often, he is the man growing the least, because the act of broadcasting himself has replaced the act of building himself. The silence of the growing man has several distinct forms. There is the silence of focus, choosing not to respond to every stimulus that competes for your attention. There is the silence of restraint, choosing not to share every opinion, every reaction, every observation just because you have one. There is the silence of strategy, staying quiet about your goals while you build toward them, so that the energy of your effort goes entirely into execution rather than into performance. And there's the silence of dignity, the refusal to lower yourself to the level of petty conflict, gossip, or the performance of grievance. Each of these silences is a choice. Each of them is a muscle. And like all muscles, they grow stronger with use and weaker with neglect. Discipline is not restriction, it is liberation. One of the most persistent and damaging myths about personal discipline is that it makes life smaller. That the disciplined man is somehow deprived of pleasure, of spontaneity, of the full experience of being alive. The Stoics annihilated this myth with their entire way of life. They did not flee from pleasure. They did not deny beauty or warmth or the full texture of human experience. What they refused was the tyranny of impulse, the condition in which a man cannot choose how to act because he is permanently at the mercy of whatever he happens to feel in the moment. That condition, which the undisciplined man mistakes for freedom, is actually the deepest possible form of enslavement. You are not free when you cannot say no to yourself. You are a prisoner with comfortable walls. Seneca wrote about the man who has mastered himself in terms that sound almost like a description of royalty. He wrote that such a man possesses a kind of sovereignty that no emperor could strip from him, because it is entirely interior. His choices are his own. His days belong to him. He is not being swept by appetite, fear, or the need for approval from one decision to the next. He is moving, deliberately and purposefully, in the direction he has chosen. This is not restriction. This is the most complete form of freedom available to a human being. And it is built, day by day, through the practice of discipline, through choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, the long-term good over the short-term comfort, the real over the convenient. Think about what happens to the man who builds real discipline over the course of a single year. He stops making impulsive decisions that cost him weeks of recovery. He stops saying yes to things that betray his priorities. He stops eating in ways that cloud his thinking and drain his energy. He stops spending time with people who pull him away from his vision. He stops consuming content that fills his mind with noise and leaves him with nothing real. Every one of those stops is a freedom gained. Every act of discipline is a wall built around what matters. And by the end of the year, the disciplined man is living in a completely different world than the undisciplined one, not because his external circumstances have magically improved, but because his interior life is now organized around his values rather than around his impulses. The Stoics practiced what they called voluntary discomfort, the deliberate choice to experience hardship in small doses as a form of training. They would fast for a day not because food was scarce but because they wanted to know that hunger could not control them. They would wear simple clothing on cold days not because they lacked warmth but because they wanted to know that physical discomfort did not own their peace. This is not masochism. It is inoculation. The man who has voluntarily sat with discomfort is not easily broken by involuntary hardship. He has already proven to himself, in the quiet of his own practice, that he can endure. And that knowledge, that deep, experiential certainty that he can handle what comes, is one of the most powerful foundations for focused growth that exists. Cutting the costs that are draining your growth. Every man reading these words is paying invisible taxes on his growth, costs he has normalized to the point where he can no longer see them. Time taxes. Energy taxes. Attention taxes. The relationships that drain without replenishing. The habits that consume hours and produce nothing. The mental loops, the grievances, the resentments, the catalogued offenses, that run in the background of his mind and pull processing power away from everything productive. The Stoics were forensic about identifying these costs. They understood that growth is not only about what you add to your life, it is equally about what you remove from it. The sculptor's metaphor applies here perfectly. Michelangelo reportedly said that the angel was already in the marble. His job was simply to remove everything that was not the angel. Your best self is already in you. Your job this year is to remove everything that is not him. Marcus Aurelius was remarkably honest about the cost of other people's drama. Not because he was misanthropic, he cared deeply about humanity in the aggregate, but because he had learned, through years of observation, that certain kinds of social engagement are parasitic. They consume your time, agitate your mind, and produce nothing of lasting value. The court gossip. The political maneuvering for petty advantage. The endless relitigation of past grievances. The performance of indignation. He trained himself to step back from all of it, not with coldness, but with the clarity of a man who knows what his time is worth and refuses to spend it on what does not serve his growth or his duty. This year, you need to do an honest audit. Not the kind of audit where you flatter yourself with a vague sense of being on the right track, the real kind. The uncomfortable kind. Look at how you spend your first 2 hours after waking. Look at how you spend your evenings. Look at the apps that have the most of your attention and ask honestly what they are producing for your life. Look at the conversations you have most frequently and ask whether they are building you or maintaining you at your current level. Look at your physical environment and ask whether it supports deep, focused work or whether it is organized around distraction. The answers will be sobering. They are supposed to be. Sobriety is the beginning of change. Epictetus was direct about the cost of trying to control things outside your reach. He wrote that the man who chases what he cannot control will be constantly frustrated, because the universe does not reorganize itself around human preferences. But the man who focuses entirely on what is within his power, his choices, his responses, his effort, his character, that man will almost never be frustrated, because he is operating in a domain where results are genuinely available to him. Cut the costs of fighting what cannot be changed. Cut the costs of needing other people to behave differently before you can feel okay. Cut the costs of requiring external validation before you will believe in your own direction. These are enormous invisible drains, and removing them does not just free up time, it frees up a quality of mental energy that most men have never experienced as adults. How the Stoics handled failure and setback. You will fail this year. Not as a prediction of your character, as a description of reality. Growth without failure is not growth, it is performance in a protected environment. The Stoics understood this not as a depressing truth but as a liberating one. Failure is not the end of the story. It is, if approached correctly, the most instructive chapter. What separates the growing man from the stagnating one is not the absence of failure but the quality of his response to it. The Stoic response to failure is one of the most powerful and practical frameworks ever developed, and it begins with a refusal to catastrophize. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the impermanence of things, not to cultivate despair, but to prevent the exaggerated suffering that comes from treating temporary setbacks as permanent verdicts. When a project fails, when a relationship breaks, when a goal is missed, the undisciplined mind turns it into evidence of a fixed and final truth, that the man is inadequate, that the effort was wasted, that the future is doomed to mirror the past. The Stoic mind rejects this narrative with both intellectual and emotional force. It asks instead, what is actually true about this situation? What can be learned from it? What would a wise and courageous man do next? And then it moves. Not in denial, in clarity. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius about the difference between a man being knocked down and a man being defeated. Being knocked down is a circumstance. Being defeated is a choice. The man who rises from the setback, who genuinely examines it, extracts the lesson, corrects what needs correcting, and continues moving, has not been defeated. He has been educated. And the education of difficulty, processed with Stoic discipline, produces a kind of strength that cannot be manufactured any other way. You cannot build resilience in the absence of adversity. The attempt to avoid all failure is actually the most reliable way to ensure that when failure inevitably comes, you have no capacity to absorb it. The Stoics also practiced something they called the obstacle as the way, the radical reframing of challenges as the actual vehicle of growth rather than interruptions to it. When the path forward is blocked, the blockage itself reveals what qualities need developing in order to proceed. The obstacle that blocks patience is calling for patience to be built. The obstacle that blocks technical skill is calling for skill to be developed. The obstacle that blocks courage is demanding that courage be summoned. This is not wishful thinking. It is an operational philosophy that keeps the growing man from losing time to self-pity and gets him back to work as quickly as possible after every setback. The role of virtue in your growth strategy. The Stoics organized their entire philosophy around four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These were not abstract ideals. They were practical categories, four distinct dimensions of character that, when developed together, produced a man capable of living and growing at the highest possible level. Most modern self-improvement frameworks focus almost entirely on output, on what you produce, earn, and achieve. The Stoics focused on input, on the quality of the man doing the producing. They understood that a man of poor character who achieves great things has built on sand. Eventually, without exception, the architecture of his character determines the durability of everything built on top of it. Wisdom, in the Stoic sense, is not academic knowledge. It is practical discernment, the ability to see situations clearly, to distinguish between what matters and what does not, to know what kind of response a given moment calls for. The man developing wisdom is building, day by day, the capacity to make better decisions. He reads not to accumulate information but to refine his judgment. He reflects on his experiences not to congratulate himself but to extract what is useful and discard what is not. He seeks out people wiser than himself not to be flattered but to be challenged. Wisdom is the first virtue because without it, the other three can be misdirected. Courage without wisdom is recklessness. Justice without wisdom is rigidity. Temperance without wisdom is mere suppression. Courage, for the Stoic, is not the absence of fear. It is the consistent choice to act in accordance with your values regardless of what fear is telling you. The man building courage this year is practicing it in small doses every single day, in the difficult conversation he does not avoid, in the commitment he honors when breaking it would be easier, in the goal he continues pursuing even when progress is invisible, in the honest word he speaks even when silence would be more comfortable. Every act of courage, however small, is a deposit into the account of your character. And over the course of a year, those deposits compound into a man who is genuinely hard to break. Justice, in the Stoic tradition, is the virtue of right relationship with other people, with your work, with your community. It is the understanding that your growth does not occur in isolation, and that the man who grows at the expense of others, or who withdraws entirely from his obligations in pursuit of solitary development, has misunderstood what growth is for. You are growing in order to be more useful, to your family, to the people who depend on you, to the larger world that your character touches. Temperance is the discipline of the appetites, the mastery of the impulse to consume, to react, to indulge, to retreat. Together, these four virtues form a complete architecture for the man who is serious about growth in 2026. Protecting your vision from the world's noise. The world in 2026 is a noise machine of unprecedented sophistication. It has been engineered, with billions of dollars of intellectual capital and psychological research, to capture and hold your attention. Every platform, every notification, every algorithm has been optimized to produce the neurochemical equivalent of a slot machine, unpredictable, variable rewards that keep you returning, scrolling, reacting, consuming. And here is what no one in that ecosystem will ever tell you: your attention is the most valuable resource you possess. More valuable than your money. More valuable than your time, because time without focused attention is just empty duration. The man who controls his attention controls his life. The man who has surrendered his attention has surrendered the keys to his own development. The Stoics had a name for the practice of guarding the mind against corrupting input. They called it prosoche, watchful attention to the self. It was not about avoiding the world. It was about curating what was allowed to enter the interior. Epictetus taught his students to ask, of every impression that arrived in their minds, is this mine to deal with? Does engaging with this serve my growth or drain it? Is this worth the portion of my life it would consume? These are not questions the modern world encourages you to ask. The modern world prefers a man who reacts automatically, who is always available, always responsive, always plugged in. The Stoic man is deliberate. He chooses what enters. He chooses what stays. And he dismisses the rest with neither guilt nor ceremony. Protecting your vision means something specific and practical. It means that the goal you are building toward, the version of yourself you are committed to becoming, is not available for public negotiation. You do not put it out for popular vote. You do not adjust it based on who doubts it. You do not dilute it to make it more palatable to people who are not invested in your success. Your vision lives in your interior, guarded by your discipline and expressed only through your actions. Marcus Aurelius wrote beautifully about the fortress of the mind, the idea that while everything external can be touched, taken, or destroyed, the quality of your interior life is yours alone, and it is impregnable if you choose to guard it. This does not mean becoming cold or arrogant. It does not mean dismissing advice, wisdom, or legitimate feedback. The Stoic who guards his vision is not a man with a closed mind, he is a man with a clear one. He can hear criticism without crumbling. He can receive input without being redirected by every wind of opinion. He can hold the vision steady while adjusting the tactics, remaining principled in the direction, while remaining flexible in the method. This is the mature form of focus, not rigid and brittle, but rooted and adaptive. The tree that survives the storm is not the one that refuses to bend. It is the one with roots deep enough that bending does not mean breaking. The Stoic practice of evening review. The Stoics did not end their days the way most modern men do, surrendering to screens, absorbing more noise, and drifting into sleep with a mind full of unprocessed stimulation. They ended their days with deliberate review. Seneca described this practice in his letters with remarkable specificity. He wrote that before sleeping, a wise man examines his day, not with self-flagellation, but with the honest, clear-eyed assessment of an impartial observer. He asks, "Where did I fall short of my own standard today? Where did I succeed in living according to my values? What did I learn? What must I carry forward tomorrow?" This practice, repeated nightly, produces an accumulating self-knowledge that is simply not available to the man who never pauses to examine his own life. The evening review serves a specific and powerful function in the growth process. It closes the loop. Most men's days are open loops, experiences, interactions, and decisions that are never fully processed, never learned from, never integrated into a revised understanding of themselves and their work. They make the same mistakes month after month not because they lack intelligence but because they never stop to connect the mistake to the outcome, the habit to the consequence, the choice to the result. The Stoic who reviews his day is doing exactly that. He is looking at the machine of his life with the detached clarity of an engineer, identifying what is working and what is not, and making calibrations for tomorrow. This practice also serves an emotional function. The day's frustrations, setbacks, and disappointments, when left unexamined, become sediment in the mind, accumulated grievances that darken future experience. The man who examines them honestly, who says, "That frustrated me, and here is what I can learn from how I responded, and here is what I will do differently tomorrow," processes the emotion rather than suppressing it. He does not carry yesterday's weight into tomorrow. He arrives at each new day cleaner, lighter, and more capable of full presence than the man whose unexamined history accumulates into a fog of chronic low-level resentment and anxiety. The evening review need not be long. Seneca himself suggested it required only minutes, the time it takes to ask 3 questions with genuine honesty. Where did I go wrong? Where did I grow? What remains to be done? 3 questions, answered honestly, night after night, produce a compounding record of self-knowledge that is more valuable than any external feedback you will ever receive. You are your own most reliable observer, if you train yourself to observe without bias. And that training is what the evening review provides. Relationships and the focused growth journey. The Stoics were not indifferent to human relationships. They were deeply social philosophers who understood that the quality of a man's character is formed, tested, and expressed primarily in relation to other people. But they were also ruthlessly discerning about which relationships served the growth of virtue and which did not. Epictetus warned his students repeatedly about the corrosive effect of spending time with people whose values are opposed to your own, not because such people are necessarily bad, but because the human mind is powerfully susceptible to the norms of its immediate environment. You will not maintain the discipline of growth in a social environment that does not value it. You will not sustain the focus of a serious man in the company of people who treat seriousness as pretension. This does not mean surrounding yourself exclusively with people who share all your goals and validate all your choices. That is not growth, that is an echo chamber. What it means is being honest about which relationships in your life are pulling you toward your best version, and which are pulling you away from it. The Stoics valued friendships of virtue, relationships in which both parties hold each other to their best standards, in which honesty is valued over comfort, in which growth is celebrated rather than resented. These relationships are rare. When you find them, protect them. Invest in them. Be the kind of friend who deserves them by holding yourself to the same standards you appreciate in others. The Stoics were also clear about the particular danger of seeking social approval as the primary driver of your decisions. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this tendency in himself with unusual candor. He recognized the pull of wanting to be seen as agreeable, generous, and admirable, and he distinguished sharply between performing virtue for the audience of others and actually living it in private. The man who grows for the approval of others will stop growing the moment the audience stops watching. The man who grows because he has committed to a standard, because he refuses to be less than what he knows he is capable of being, that man does not need an audience. His growth is self-sustaining. Your relationships this year are not bystanders to your growth. They are either accelerants or decelerants. The people you spend the most time with will either challenge you to rise or they will normalize the level at which you currently exist. This is not a criticism of the people in your life, it is a description of human nature. We adapt to our environment. We unconsciously calibrate our effort and our ambition to the standards of the people around us. The growing man is intentional about this. He chooses his environment with the same care that he chooses his habits, because the environment shapes the habits before the habits can shape the man. The Stoic view of health as foundation for growth. No philosophy of growth is complete without confronting the physical. The Stoics understood the body as the house of the mind, not the whole of the man, but the foundation on which everything else is built. Epictetus, who lived with a permanent physical disability, was not romantic about the body. But he was practical about it. He understood that neglecting the body is not Stoic indifference, it is stupidity. A man who allows his physical health to deteriorate while claiming to be focused on interior development has confused philosophy with avoidance. Taking care of the body is a Stoic obligation because the clarity, energy, and endurance required for focused growth are physiological before they are psychological. Marcus Aurelius maintained a rigorous physical discipline throughout his reign despite chronic illness and the physical demands of military campaigns. He understood that the undisciplined body produces an undisciplined mind, that the man who cannot govern his appetite for food, rest, and ease will find it proportionally more difficult to govern his appetite for distraction, comfort, and approval. The disciplines are connected. They reinforce each other. The man who rises at 5 in the morning, moves his body with intention, eats with purpose, and manages his rest as a resource rather than an indulgence is building not just physical health but the discipline architecture that his mental and emotional growth requires. This year, your physical health is not separate from your growth practice. It is a dimension of it. The Stoics believed in the principle of appropriate action, doing what the situation requires, either more nor less, with the right quality of attention and effort. Your body requires movement. Your mind requires the clarity that only proper sleep and proper nutrition can provide. Your emotional regulation requires the neurochemical foundation that exercise consistently delivers. These are not soft recommendations. They are structural requirements. The man who treats his physical health as optional is building his growth practice on a foundation that will crack under the weight of any serious challenge. Mastering the art of saying no. Growth requires subtraction as much as addition, and there is no subtraction without the ability to say no. The Stoics were extraordinary at this, not because they were selfish or antisocial, but because they understood the fundamental arithmetic of attention and time. Every yes to something that does not serve your growth is a no to something that does. Every hour given to the trivial is an hour withheld from the essential. The man who cannot say no is not generous. He is unfocused. He has mistaken availability for virtue, and in doing so, he has made everyone else's agenda his own while abandoning his own work undone. Seneca was blunt about the man who cannot manage his time because he cannot refuse requests. He wrote that such a man lives for everyone but himself, always occupied, never fulfilled, perpetually busy but never progressing. This is not a description of generosity. It is a description of a man who has not yet developed the self-knowledge to understand what his time is for, or the self-respect to protect it. Saying no is not an act of hostility. It is an act of honesty, an acknowledgement that your time has a purpose, that your energy is finite, and that maintaining boundaries around both is a prerequisite for any meaningful work. The Stoic practice of saying no is not arbitrary. It is guided by the fundamental question, does this align with my highest purpose? Does this serve the growth I have committed to? Does this honor the values I have pledged to live by? When the answer is no, the response is no, delivered calmly, clearly, and without excessive explanation. The man who over-explains his refusals is still seeking approval. The man who delivers a clear, respectful no and then returns to his work has internalized what the Stoics understood, that his life is his own, and that he owes no one his potential. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now if this message is resonating, because this is the content that changes the direction of a life, and there is more of it waiting for you in this channel. The men who are growing are the men who are investing in this kind of thinking every single day. The Stoic Edge is built for you. Tap that subscribe button and become part of a community of men who are choosing growth over comfort, focus over distraction, and wisdom over noise. The compound effect of daily Stoic practice. There is a mathematical reality underlying all consistent growth that the Stoics understood intuitively even without the language of modern mathematics. Small consistent actions, compounded over time, produce results that are exponentially disproportionate to the individual effort. The man who practices one Stoic principle each morning for a year has not just practiced it 365 times. He has become a man with a different brain, a different character, and a fundamentally different relationship to his own life. The transformation is not linear. It is exponential. And it begins, this is crucial, with actions so small that the impatient man dismisses them entirely. Marcus Aurelius did not become one of the most admired human beings in history through a single magnificent act of courage or wisdom. He became who he was through the daily, unglamorous practice of examining his thoughts, correcting his impulses, and returning, again and again, to the standard he had set for himself. The Meditations, which were never intended for publication, they were private notes to himself, reveal a man in constant, daily practice. A man who made mistakes, felt frustration and impatience, struggled with the temptation to take shortcuts, and then corrected his course the next day. The greatness of Marcus Aurelius is not a portrait of perfection. It is a portrait of consistency. The compound effect works in both directions, which is why the Stoics were so vigilant. Small consistent virtues compound into strength. But small consistent vices compound into weakness. The man who tells himself that one day of poor sleep, one day of poor eating, one day of undisciplined thinking means nothing is not wrong about the individual day. He is wrong about the direction. Direction, compounded over time, matters more than any single day's performance. The man pointed slightly in the wrong direction who makes no correction will find himself a significant distance from where he intended to be after a year of consistent movement. The man who corrects his direction daily, even slightly, arrives somewhere magnificent. Think about what happens to the man who spends 30 minutes each morning with a Stoic text, not casually reading, but actively applying. By the end of the year, he has spent more than 180 hours in direct intellectual contact with the wisest minds in human history. By the end of the year, he has read, reflected on, and partially integrated the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca into the operating system of his daily life. The man who spent those same hours on social media has two things: less time and more noise. The compound effect does not care about your intentions. It cares about your habits. And your habits are the daily vote you cast for the man you are becoming. Redefining success through a Stoic lens. Success, as the modern world defines it, is a moving target that keeps the man perpetually chasing and perpetually insufficient. It is defined in terms of external comparison. More than you had before, more than the man next to you, more than what the culture tells you is the baseline of adequacy. This definition of success is designed not to produce fulfilled men but to produce perpetually consuming ones, men who will spend their entire lives in pursuit of a finish line that is always being moved. The Stoics rejected this framework entirely and replaced it with something radically different and radically more functional. Success defined as the complete and honest expression of your best character in every situation available to you. By this definition, success is not comparative. It is not relative to anyone else's achievement. It is not dependent on external circumstances that can be taken away. A man is successful, in the Stoic sense, to the exact degree that he is living in accordance with his values, exercising wisdom in his judgments, courage in his actions, justice in his relationships, and temperance in his appetites. A man can be poor by the world's standards and rich by the Stoics. A man can be celebrated by the world and, by the Stoic standard, have achieved nothing of lasting value. This is not an argument against external achievement. The Stoics were not against wealth, influence, or recognition. They were against allowing those things to become the measure of a life. This reframing has enormous practical consequences for your growth this year. When success is defined as external achievement, every day that does not produce visible results feels wasted. The man on a long plateau, working hard, practicing his craft, building quietly, experiences his progress as failure because the scoreboard is not moving. When success is defined as the daily expression of your best character, there are no wasted days. Every day in which you practiced discipline was a success. Every day in which you responded to frustration with patience rather than reaction was a success. Every day in which you chose your long-term vision over a short-term impulse was a success. These successes are invisible to the world and absolutely real in the ledger of your character. Seneca wrote that the happy man, by which he meant the fully flourishing man, is the one who depends on nothing outside himself for his sense of well-being. Not the absence of challenge, not the presence of comfort, not the validation of others, not the continuation of favorable circumstances. The happy man in Seneca's philosophy is the man who has built his interior life so solidly that the fluctuations of the external world, while noticed and dealt with practically, do not determine the fundamental quality of his experience. That is the success worth pursuing in 2026. That is the target the Stoic philosophy has been pointing at for 2,000 years. Building momentum in the face of resistance. There will come a point in the first months of your growth practice, maybe it has already come, when the initial enthusiasm gives way to the grind. The excitement of decision becomes the daily discipline of execution. The ideas that felt electric when you first encountered them are now tested by the friction of actual implementation. This is the hinge point. This is the moment that separates the men who transform from the men who cycle back to their starting position with another set of unfulfilled intentions. The Stoics knew this moment well. They even had a name for the force that produces it. They called it the resistance of nature, the natural tendency of all things, including the human character, to revert to their prior state without continued effort. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the temptation to return to sleep, literally and metaphorically. He described the interior argument that happens when the alarm sounds in the dark, the voice that says it is cold, that the warmth of the bed is real and the purpose of getting up is abstract, that one more hour will not matter. And then he described the response he trained himself to give, that a man was made for work, not for warmth, that the body's preference for ease was not the same as the man's preference for greatness, that getting up was not a concession to discipline but an expression of identity. He described this not to celebrate a single morning's victory but to show the practice of responding to resistance with a consistent assertion of values over impulse. The way to build momentum in the face of resistance is not to eliminate resistance, it is to make your response to it automatic. The Stoics understood that relying on motivation and willpower as the primary drivers of action is a losing strategy because both are unstable. Motivation depends on feeling, and feeling is variable. What does not vary, what becomes over time, as reliable as gravity, is identity. The man who has deeply internalized the identity of a growing, disciplined, focused person does not need motivation to act in accordance with that identity. He simply does what he is. The practice is in building that identity through repeated, consistent action until the action requires no more deliberate choice than breathing does. Start smaller than you think you should. This is counterintuitive but essential. The man who tries to transform 10 habits simultaneously will, predictably, transform none of them. The man who chooses one, the single habit that, if done consistently, would create the most significant positive leverage on everything else, and then executes that habit with complete reliability for 90 days has done something extraordinary. He has proven to himself that he can be trusted. That his word to himself means something. And that proof becomes the foundation on which the next habit is built, and then the next, compounding into a life that is genuinely unrecognizable from the one he was living before he started. The Stoic relationship with time. Of all the resources available to the growing man, time is the only one that cannot be recovered. Money lost can be earned back. Relationships damaged can be repaired. Health, within limits, can be restored. But the hour that has just passed is gone permanently, without exception or appeal. The Stoics understood this with a gravity that shaped every dimension of their philosophy. Seneca opens one of his most famous essays by observing that everyone complains about the shortness of life while wasting most of it, and that if men actually lived all the time they have, they would find that life is quite long enough. The problem is not the length of the time allotted. The problem is the quality of attention brought to its use. The Stoics practiced what might be called temporal clarity, an unusually honest accounting of how their time was actually being spent versus how it should be spent. They distinguished between time that belonged to their essential work, time that was given in genuine service to others, and time that was simply lost, to triviality, to the demands of others, to habits that produced nothing. The lost time was the focus of their concern, because they understood that lost time is not an accident. It is a choice. Every hour of triviality was, at some level, chosen over an hour of substance. And while this truth is uncomfortable, it is also empowering, because if time loss is a choice, then time reclamation is also a choice. Marcus Aurelius returned repeatedly to the theme of impermanence, not to cultivate despair but to cultivate urgency. He wrote about men long dead who had seemed, in their time, indispensable, emperors, generals, philosophers, and observed that the tide of time had covered them all equally. He used this not to argue that nothing matters but to argue that the time available to make things matter is genuinely limited. The man who treats his days as though they are infinite, as though there is always more time to begin the work, to have the honest conversation, to pursue the growth, to become the man he intends to be, that man is not being optimistic. He is being imprecise. Precision about time is a Stoic virtue because it is the guardian of all other virtues. This year, practice what Seneca called the reclamation of time, the deliberate, daily recovery of hours that would otherwise be spent on the trivial. You do not need to recover all of them. Begin with 1 hour per day invested in your growth, your craft, your health, or your highest purpose, taken back from the noise that was previously consuming it. 1 hour per day is 365 hours per year. At 35 hours of focused work per week, that is more than 10 full work weeks invested in what matters most to you. That is a transformative amount of time. And it is available to you right now, hidden in the hours you are currently spending on things that add nothing to your life. The inner citadel, your fortress against distraction. Marcus Aurelius developed one of the most powerful concepts in all of Stoic philosophy when he described what he called the inner citadel, the inviolable interior space that remains yours regardless of what circumstances do to your external life. The Stoics understood that a man who has built and fortified his interior life has a base of operations from which no external force can displace him. He can lose money, the citadel remains. He can lose status, the citadel remains. He can be criticized, undermined, ignored, or wronged, the citadel remains. The man whose identity, direction, and values are rooted in that interior space is not at the mercy of what happens around him. He is, in the truest sense of the word, free. Building the inner citadel is not a metaphysical exercise. It is a practical one, accomplished through exactly the practices this script has been describing: the morning premeditation, the evening review, the cultivation of the 4 virtues, the practice of silence, the protection of time, the development of discipline. Each of these practices adds another layer to the interior architecture. Each makes the citadel more solid, more resilient, more capable of withstanding the kind of pressure that the world will inevitably apply. The man who has not built this interior architecture is structurally vulnerable. He can be destabilized by a bad performance review, a failed relationship, a public embarrassment, or a stretch of poor results. These things matter, but they should not own him. The citadel is what prevents them from owning him. Practically, building the inner citadel means developing what the Stoics called an unconditional internal standard, a set of values and behaviors that you hold to regardless of whether doing so is rewarded, recognized, or even noticed. You maintain your discipline on the days when no one is watching. You hold to your honesty when lying would be more convenient. You hold to your patience when everyone around you is losing theirs. You hold to your focus when the social environment is pulling toward distraction. Each time you hold the standard when holding it costs you something, you add another stone to the citadel wall. And over time, the wall becomes thick enough that it can hold against storms that would have leveled you in a previous version of your life. The inner citadel also serves as the source of your long-term perspective, the capacity to hold the big picture while engaged in the day-to-day. The man who can zoom out from his immediate frustrations, his current plateau, his present setback, and see them in the context of a life being built deliberately over years, that man is not derailed by what is merely difficult. He does not confuse a hard chapter with a failed story. He does not mistake a slow season with a stagnant life. He is building something. He knows it. The citadel is where that knowledge lives, immune to the noise and the doubt and the discouragement that the world will periodically throw against its walls. What the growing man looks like at the end of the year. Imagine the man you will be at the close of this year if you take everything in this script and do more than hear it, if you actually live it. Not perfectly. Not without failure. But consistently, honestly, and with the deep commitment of a man who has decided that this is the year. Picture him at the close of December. He wakes before dawn not because he has to but because he has built a relationship with the morning that he values. He moves through his early hours in the quiet that he has chosen, doing the work that matters before the world can make its demands. He carries himself with a different quality of presence, not arrogance, but rootedness. The kind of calm that comes from a man who knows who he is, what he stands for, and where he is going. He is not perfect. He has had bad days this year. He has fallen short of his own standard more times than he wanted to. But he has not abandoned the standard. He has returned to it, each time more capable than the last, because the return itself builds muscle. He has learned more about himself this year than in the previous 5 combined, not because he encountered more interesting circumstances but because he stopped running from self-knowledge and started actively cultivating it. He has the honest relationship with his own character that only the man who examines himself regularly can have, and it has made him more effective, more grounded, and more at peace than the unexamined version of himself ever was. He has simplified. He has removed the relationships that drained him. He has reduced the commitments that scattered him. He has cut the habits that darkened his thinking and replaced them with practices that sharpen it. He is less everywhere and more somewhere, more present, more engaged, more genuinely useful in the domains that actually matter to him. He has said no to things that previously he would have said yes to out of habit or guilt, or the need to be liked. He has said yes to his own work with a conviction that he has never previously felt, because he has built the discipline to back that yes up with action rather than just intention. And he knows, with the quiet certainty of a man who has lived through a year of consistent practice, that what he built this year cannot be taken from him. Not by circumstance. Not by failure. Not by the opinions of people who did not believe in his direction. He has become, in the most important sense of the word, more himself. More deliberate. More capable. More aligned with the man he always knew he could be but could never quite reach before he found the philosophy, the practice, and the community that showed him how. That man is available to you. He is the product of everything you have heard in this script, applied consistently for the next 365 days. The work begins now. The final charge. Marcus Aurelius wrote near the end of the Meditations something that has survived 2,000 years because it is simply, undeniably true. He wrote that a man must stand erect, not be held erect. This is the final charge of Stoic philosophy and the final charge of this script. No one is coming to do this work for you. No motivation speech, however powerful, will sustain you if you do not make the decision. No community, however supportive, will do your reps for you. No philosophy, however profound, will improve you without your daily application of it. You have to stand erect. You have to choose, each morning, to be the man you are capable of being rather than the man of least resistance. You have to do the interior work with the same seriousness and consistency that you would give to any external project you actually believed in. This is not a burden. It is the privilege of being a man who is alive at a time when these ideas are available, when the wisdom of the greatest minds in human history can be accessed, studied, and applied by anyone with the desire to do so. Epictetus was born into slavery. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire in constant crisis. Seneca navigated betrayal, exile, and the constant proximity of political violence. They practiced Stoicism under conditions that make your morning commute feel like a meditation retreat. If they could build lives of profound virtue, clarity, and meaning under those conditions, what is your excuse? The year 2026 is yours to define. The version of yourself that exists at the end of it is being built right now, with this decision, this practice, this daily commitment to something greater than your comfort and more important than your applause. The Stoic Edge is here to walk that road with you, to give you the philosophy, the framework, and the community of men who are building the same thing you are building. If this video has reached something real in you, do not let it drift. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now, tap that button, join this channel, and commit to showing up every single week for the content that will fortify the man you are becoming. The conversations here are not background noise. They are the material of your transformation. The only moment you have is now. The only decision that matters is the one you make today. The Stoics did not wait for the perfect conditions to begin the work. They began where they were, with what they had, in service of the best version of themselves that their vision could conceive. And so can you. Stand erect. Begin. The man who stopped competing with everyone else. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living in constant comparison. It is not the exhaustion of effort. That exhaustion is clean, earned, and followed by rest. It is the exhaustion of surveillance, of perpetually monitoring other people's positions, achievements, and trajectories in order to locate yourself in relation to them. This is the exhaustion of the man who cannot open a social media app without measuring himself against the curated highlight reel of someone he barely knows. It is the exhaustion of the man who cannot hear about a colleague's success without involuntarily calculating whether it diminishes his own. It is, the Stoics would say, the exhaustion of a man who has outsourced the definition of his worth to a market he will never be able to control. Marcus Aurelius addressed this with a directness that cuts through the centuries unchanged. He wrote that the man who does not know what the universe is does not know where he is. And the man who does not know his own purpose does not know who he is. The implication is clear. Without that interior clarity, you will inevitably seek your bearings externally. You will look to other people's lives to tell you whether yours is sufficient. And this is a system guaranteed to produce misery, because there will always be someone with more, someone further ahead, someone whose circumstances appear more favorable. The race without a finish line is not a race. It is a trap. The growing man stops competing with everyone else not because he becomes indifferent to excellence but because he discovers a more demanding and more rewarding competition, the competition with his own previous standard. This is the only race the Stoics respected. Not man against man but man against the highest version of himself. Epictetus taught that the philosopher's real opponent is not the man across the room but the weakness, the cowardice, and the dishonesty within his own character. Defeat those enemies and the external competition becomes irrelevant. You will have already won the only contest that produces lasting satisfaction. This shift, from external comparison to internal standard, changes everything about how you experience your day-to-day progress. The man in external competition is only satisfied when he is ahead. The man in internal competition finds genuine satisfaction in any day where he was more disciplined, more honest, more courageous, or more purposeful than the day before. That satisfaction is available every single day. It does not require favorable conditions, impressive results, or the observation of others. It requires only that you held your own standard and advanced it, however incrementally, in the direction of the man you are becoming. Anger, ego, and the enemies of your growth. The Stoics were meticulous students of the interior enemies, the emotional and psychological patterns that sabotage growth from within. And of all those patterns, they identified two as particularly destructive to the focused man: anger and ego. Not because passion or self-respect are wrong, the Stoics valued both. but because anger unchecked and ego unexamined are guaranteed to redirect the energy meant for growth into conflicts, compulsions, and performances that serve nothing but the moment's agitation. Seneca wrote an entire treatise on anger, one of the most psychologically astute documents in all of ancient literature, because he had observed that anger is among the most expensive habits a man can carry. He wrote that anger promises something it cannot deliver. It promises relief, the catharsis of expression, the satisfaction of having struck back, the momentary feeling of power that comes from having reacted rather than absorbed. But what it actually delivers is the aftermath, the broken trust, the regrettable words, the diverted energy, the hours of agitation that follow the moment of heat. The bill of anger is always larger than the invoice, and the growing man cannot afford to keep paying it. The Stoic practice for managing anger is not suppression. Suppressed anger does not disappear, it accumulates and manifests in deteriorated health, flattened relationships, and a general deadening of vitality that no amount of discipline can fully compensate for. The Stoic practice is transformation, the rerouting of the energy that anger contains into a productive channel. When something provokes rage, the Stoic pauses. He inserts space between the stimulus and the response. He asks whether this situation falls within his control or outside it. If outside, he releases it. If inside, he acts on it with purpose rather than heat. That pause, that sliver of space between what happens and how you respond, is where your freedom lives. Ego is a subtler enemy because it wears the costume of virtue. The man driven by ego believes he is motivated by excellence when he is actually motivated by the appearance of excellence. He is building for the audience rather than for the purpose. He takes every setback as a personal affront and every success as proof of his superiority. He cannot receive honest feedback because his identity is too invested in being right. He cannot celebrate others' growth because his ego reads it as a reduction of his own. Epictetus was particularly unsparing about the man driven by reputation. He wrote that such a man has made himself a slave to the opinions of people whose judgment he does not even respect. The Stoic dissolves the ego not through self-deprecation but through purpose, by becoming so focused on the work itself that the performance of the work becomes irrelevant. The Stoic approach to money and material life. The Stoics are sometimes misread as anti-wealth philosophers, as men who believe that money was inherently corrupting and that the virtuous life required poverty. This is a misreading. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men of his era. Marcus Aurelius wielded the resources of an empire. Several prominent Stoics were successful merchants and landowners. The Stoic position on money was not that it is bad. It was that it is indifferent, what the Stoics called an external preferred indifferent. Wealth is useful when pursued through honest means and used in service of virtue. It is harmful when it becomes the object of obsessive desire, when its pursuit requires the sacrifice of character, or when its possession produces a false sense of security and worth. Epictetus, who had nothing, and Seneca, who had everything, arrived at the same conclusion from opposite directions. A man's relationship with money is a mirror of his relationship with himself. The man who panics at the threat of financial loss has made money the container of his security. The man who ignores his financial responsibilities in the name of philosophical detachment has confused wisdom with irresponsibility. The balanced Stoic approach is one of engaged non-attachment. Take the practical steps required to build financial stability, work with genuine effort and skill, create value in the world and receive value in return, but hold it all lightly enough that losing it would not destroy the interior life you have built. For the growing man in 2026, the Stoic approach to money means building genuine financial competence without making financial status the measure of your worth. It means distinguishing between the money required for a dignified life of purpose and the money required to perform wealth for an audience. It means examining whether your current relationship with material life is one of deliberate adequacy or one of compulsive accumulation, whether you are building toward genuine security or running from genuine inadequacy on an ever-accelerating financial treadmill. These are uncomfortable questions. The Stoics ask them anyway, because the man who cannot examine his relationship with money cannot examine himself. The Stoic also understood that the greatest investment available to a man is not in any external asset but in the development of his own character and capabilities, what the Greeks called his arete. The man who has built genuine excellence in a domain, genuine discipline in his habits, and genuine wisdom in his judgments is resilient against the losses that financially and emotionally fragile men cannot survive. Circumstances can destroy a portfolio. They cannot destroy a man of character who has built his foundation on the interior rather than the exterior. How to read your own life like a Stoic. The Stoics were committed practitioners of self-examination, not in the neurotic, self-absorbed sense of constant internal analysis that produces paralysis, but in the clear-eyed, practical sense of regularly consulting the quality of your own life as a diagnostic. They read their own lives the way a skilled physician reads a patient, looking for patterns, identifying sources of dysfunction, tracing symptoms back to their causes, and prescribing adjustments with the confidence of someone who has studied the subject deeply. The subject of Stoic self-examination was always the same: is this life aligned with virtue, or has it drifted? Marcus Aurelius returned to this question constantly in the Meditations. He was not asking it from a position of crisis. He was asking it from a position of maintenance, the ongoing calibration of a man who understood that alignment with virtue is not a destination achieved once and held forever. It is a living practice that requires daily tending. A garden left untended does not stay as it was, it reverts to wildness. A character left unexamined does not stay as it was, it reverts to the path of least resistance, which is rarely the path of most virtue. Reading your own life like a Stoic requires 3 specific capacities. The first is honesty, the willingness to see yourself without the flattering distortions of self-justification. Most men are extraordinarily skilled at explaining away their failures, externalizing their shortcomings, and remembering their history in a version that places them in the most favorable light. The Stoic demands something different: the courage to look at the gap between your values and your behavior, and call it by its real name rather than papering over it with excuses. The second capacity is detachment, the ability to observe yourself with the same objectivity you would bring to observing anyone else. You are not your behavior. You are the person choosing the behavior. That distinction creates the space needed for honest assessment. The third capacity is forward orientation. The Stoic does not examine his life in order to flagellate himself for his failures. He examines his life in order to improve it. The point is always practical: what is working, what is not, and what is the next right action. The man who reads his own life with these 3 capacities active, honesty, detachment, and forward orientation, will never be permanently lost. He may go off course. All men do. But he has the instruments to locate himself, correct his direction, and continue moving with purpose. The power of doing one thing well. In an era that celebrates multitasking, side hustles, and the performance of being perpetually busy across 100 fronts simultaneously, the Stoic philosophy of singular focus is almost radical. The Stoics were not interested in doing many things adequately. They were interested in doing the right things with complete presence and genuine excellence. This is not a limitation of ambition, it is a deepening of it. The man who does one thing well enough to become genuinely excellent at it has done something that the man scattered across 10 mediocre pursuits never will. He has created real value. He has built real mastery. And in the long run, genuine mastery in one domain is more productive, more satisfying, and more respected than competent mediocrity across many. Epictetus was direct about the scattered man. He observed that the man who tries to be everything to everyone ends up being nothing of substance to anyone, including himself. This is not because versatility is wrong, it is because real versatility is built on a foundation of genuine depth in at least one domain. The man who has mastered himself in one area has learned something that transfers: the capacity for the deep, sustained, uncomfortable work that excellence in any domain requires. He knows what it feels like to stay with something past the point of easy progress. He knows how to push through plateaus. He knows the difference between the resistance that signals you are going the wrong way and the resistance that signals you are doing real work. This year, The practice of doing one thing well means identifying the single most important domain of your growth, and then protecting your investment in it with ruthless consistency. Not at the expense of your responsibilities. Not in a way that harms the people who depend on you. But with a clear and unwavering commitment that says, "This is my primary work, and I will not allow the trivial, the habitual, or the comfortable to consume the time and energy this work requires." The Stoics called this living according to nature, living in alignment with your particular capacities and gifts, rather than imitating someone else's path or dispersing yourself across pursuits that do not belong to your nature. The man who does one thing well this year will be a different man at the end of it. Not just more skilled, more grounded. More confident in the deep, unperformative way that comes from knowing you have done real work and built something real. That is the foundation on which every subsequent year of growth is built. You cannot fake that foundation. You cannot shortcut it. But you can build it, one day of honest effort at a time, starting now. What Stoicism teaches about the people who left. Every man who is serious about his growth will, at some point, lose people. Not through cruelty or carelessness, simply through the natural divergence of paths that occurs when one person is committed to significant change and others are not. The friend who cannot understand why you are waking early. The colleague who is unsettled by your refusal to participate in collective complaining. The family member who reads your silence as arrogance rather than focus. The relationship that dissolves not because of a specific conflict but because the version of you that it was built around is no longer the version of you that exists. These losses are real. They deserve to be honored. But they should not be misunderstood. Marcus Aurelius wrote about loss, including the loss of people, with a characteristic combination of honesty and perspective. He did not pretend that loss is easy. He was not a man who suppressed his grief or performed indifference as a form of strength. But he understood that loss, including the loss of relationships, is woven into the nature of a life fully lived. The man who changes does not change alone. His change has consequences for the people around him. Some will grow with him. Some will not. Both outcomes are part of the story. The Stoic does not grieve departures with resentment. He does not interpret the people who have left as evidence that his growth is wrong or that his direction is misguided. He holds the loss with gratitude for what was real about it, and with the clarity to understand that not every relationship is meant to span every chapter of a life. Some are for seasons. Some are for reasons. The man who tries to hold on to every relationship at any cost, who shrinks himself back to his previous dimensions to avoid the discomfort of someone else's inability to accept his growth, has betrayed his own development in the name of approval. The Stoics would call this a poor trade. What Stoicism teaches about the people who left is this: honor what was good, release what is gone, and continue building with the people who are present, willing, and capable of meeting you where you now stand. The man who has grown is not empty of connection. He is now available for connection at a deeper level, with people whose character and direction are genuinely aligned with his own. These connections, when they come, are of a quality that the man he used to be was not capable of sustaining. Growth does not isolate you. It eventually connects you with better. Gratitude as a Stoic practice, not a soft sentiment. When most people hear the word gratitude, they think of a soft, passive sentiment, a warm feeling directed at good fortune. The Stoic understanding of gratitude is harder, more demanding, and far more useful than that. The Stoics practice gratitude not as an emotion but as a discipline, a deliberate, daily act of recognition that reorients the mind from deficit toward abundance, from complaint toward engagement, from the passive reception of circumstances toward the active appreciation of what is real and present. This is not positivity for its own sake. It is a psychological technology for maintaining the quality of attention required for sustained growth. Seneca wrote that the happy man is not the man who has the most but the man who needs the least, and then built on that by observing that the man who recognizes what he already has is liberated from the tyranny of perpetual wanting. The perpetually wanting man cannot be fully present in his work because his attention is always partially directed toward what he does not yet have. The grateful man, the one who has taken stock of his actual life and genuinely recognized its sufficiency, is capable of full presence. He is not distracted by the ghost of a better life somewhere else. He is here, fully, doing the work that is in front of him with the resources that are actually available. The Stoic practice of gratitude is also a practice of memento mori, the deliberate contemplation of impermanence. When you genuinely hold in your awareness that this morning, this health, this capacity for work, this relationship, this day could all be lost, not as a morbid exercise but as an honest confrontation with reality, the quality of your engagement with all of it changes. You are no longer taking the morning for granted. You are no longer postponing the full investment of your attention until conditions are better. You are here now, with what you have, doing what you can. This is the Stoic version of aliveness, not a performance of enthusiasm, but the genuine presence of a man who knows he is spending something irreplaceable, and has decided to spend it well. Make it a daily practice this year. Not a list. Not a journal entry performed for the sake of the habit. A genuine, quiet moment each morning in which you actually look at your life, at the functioning body, the working mind, the relationships that are real, the work that is yours to do, and recognize that these are not small things. They are everything. The man who begins each day from that recognition builds on a foundation of genuine sufficiency. And from sufficiency, genuine growth becomes possible in a way it never can from the anxious, grasping place of perpetual deficit. The Stoic leader, how your growth serves others. A man who grows only for himself has misunderstood the purpose of growth. The Stoics were not individualists in the modern, solipsistic sense of the word. They believed deeply in the concept of cosmopolitanism, the understanding that every human being is a citizen of a larger community, and that the development of individual virtue is in service of that community, not in opposition to it. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire, but he understood his role as emperor not as the privilege of command but as the obligation of service to the people under his care, to the philosophical tradition he was part of, and to the vision of human flourishing that his life was meant to embody. His personal growth was never purely personal. It was always in service of something larger. This understanding changes the motivation for growth in a fundamental way. The man who grows for himself alone is driven by a kind of private competition. He is building his character as a personal project, accountable only to himself. The man who grows in service of others has a different quality of fuel. He is building not just for his own satisfaction but for his capacity to be useful, to his family, to the people who depend on his leadership, to the younger men who are watching how he navigates his life and learning from what they observe. The Stoic understands that this is not a burden. It is one of the most powerful motivations available to a human being. The desire to be genuinely useful to others, when rooted in virtue rather than in the need for approval, produces a quality and consistency of effort that self-interest alone rarely sustains. Think about the man in your life who most influenced the direction of your growth. Chances are strong that it was not the man who told you the most. It was the man who showed you the most, who lived with a quality of character that demonstrated, without argument or instruction, what was possible. The man who was steady when everything was unstable. The man who told the truth when lying would have been easier. The man who did the right thing when no one was watching. That man was a Stoic in practice whether he knew the word or not, and his influence on your life was not the result of his credentials or his charisma. It was the result of his character. Your growth this year will be witnessed. By your children, if you have them. By the younger men in your orbit. By your friends who are on the fence about whether change is actually possible at this stage of life. By your own future self, who will either look back on this year as the turning point or as another cycle of intentions not followed through. You are not growing in private. You are building a demonstration. Make it worth watching. The art of patience in a world that demands speed. Speed is the dominant value of the modern world. Fast results, instant feedback, rapid iteration, overnight transformation. The technology that has built this speed culture has delivered genuine benefits. But it has also systematically eroded the capacity for patient, sustained effort that all meaningful growth requires. The man who has been trained to expect results in days is poorly equipped for the years-long process of genuine character development. He mistakes the absence of visible progress for the absence of actual progress. He abandons practices before they have had time to work. He moves from approach to approach, method to method, philosophy to philosophy, always searching for the faster route that does not exist. The Stoics were students of time in the deepest sense. They understood that certain things cannot be rushed without being ruined. The oak tree cannot be fast-tracked. The soldier cannot be battle-ready before his training is complete. The philosopher cannot be wise before he has lived through enough experience with enough reflection to distill genuine insight from it. And the man of character cannot be formed in a month of intense effort, however sincere. He is formed across years of consistent practice, across seasons of difficulty weathered and lessons absorbed, across the long, unglamorous accumulation of small choices made in the right direction. Seneca wrote about patience not as a passive waiting but as an active alignment with the pace at which things naturally develop. The patient man is not the man doing nothing. He is the man doing the right things consistently and trusting, based on understanding rather than blind faith, that the work he is doing will produce results on a timeline that cannot be compressed without compromising the quality of what is produced. He plants, he tends, he waits. Not with anxiety but with the calm certainty of someone who understands how growth actually works and has made his peace with its pace. This year, practice patience as a Stoic discipline. When the progress feels invisible, keep going. When the results lag behind the effort, keep going. When the people around you seem to be advancing faster, keep going, on your path, at your pace, toward your standard. The Stoics understood that most men quit just before the work begins to compound. They stop at the exact moment that patience would have been rewarded. Do not be that man. Be the man who understands that delayed results are not absent results. They are building beneath the surface, gathering the force that will make them unmistakable when they finally arrive. Stoic principles for the hard seasons. Not every season of the growing man's life is a season of visible advancement. There are seasons of loss, of difficulty, of apparent regression, seasons where the circumstances of life make it genuinely hard to practice anything that looks like growth. A health crisis. A financial collapse. The end of a long relationship. The death of someone central to your life. These are not hypothetical challenges. They are the real texture of a life fully lived, and the Stoic philosophy was built not for the easy seasons but for exactly these ones. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations during some of the hardest years of Roman history, years of plague, of military defeat, of political betrayal, and of personal grief. He was not writing from a position of philosophical ease. He was writing from the front line of genuine difficulty, trying to hold his character together under conditions that would have broken lesser men. And what he discovered, and recorded, is that the Stoic principles are most valuable precisely when they are hardest to practice, that the moment of greatest difficulty is the moment in which the interior work proves its worth or reveals its absence. In the hard seasons, the Stoic does not pretend that difficulty is not difficult. He does not perform equanimity as a kind of emotional costume while suffering underneath it. He allows the full weight of what is real to be felt, because feeling reality is not weakness, it is honesty. What he does not do is allow the feeling to determine his actions. He does not allow grief to become abandonment of his values. He does not allow fear to become surrender of his purpose. He does not allow the difficulty of a season to become the conclusion of a life story. He holds the thread. However thin it becomes in the hardest moments, he holds it. The Stoic practice during hard seasons is simplified. It is not the time for ambitious expansion. It is the time for return to the fundamentals, the morning silence, the basic physical care of the body, the one small act of discipline each day that reminds you who you are when the circumstances are not telling you. The man who can maintain even a fraction of his practice during the hardest seasons emerges from them with a kind of seasoned strength that the man who only practiced during the easy seasons simply does not have. The hard seasons are not interruptions to your growth. Survived with Stoic intention, they are its most accelerated phase. Why the Stoic man keeps coming back to the work. There will be days when this philosophy does not feel like liberation. There will be days when it feels like a demanding standard that you have repeatedly failed to meet. Days when the gap between who you are and who you intended to be is embarrassingly wide. Days when the discipline broke down, the patience ran out, the ego flared, and the comparison crept in despite everything. On those days, the man who has only been practicing Stoicism as a performance will put it down. The man who has been practicing it as a genuine commitment will come back to it. The reason the Stoic man comes back is not that he has no other choice. It is that he has looked honestly at the alternatives. He has seen what the undisciplined life produces in the men he knows and in the chapters of his own past that were lived without philosophical intention. He has felt the particular hollowness of a day spent in distraction, the way it ends with a residue of vague guilt and the sense of having let something important slide. He has felt the clarity that follows a day of genuine focus, honest effort, and disciplined attention. He knows the difference in his body, in his mood, in the quality of his sleep, in his relationship with himself. And that knowledge, experiential, not theoretical, is what brings him back. Epictetus taught that the philosopher's task is not to achieve perfection but to continue the practice. Not to arrive at a permanent state of virtue but to keep choosing virtue as the direction of his daily effort. The return to the work after failure is not a defeat, it is the practice itself. Every man who has ever built anything of lasting value has failed, recovered, and continued. The failure is not the story. The return is the story. The man who keeps coming back, who refuses to let a bad week become a bad month or a bad month become a permanent surrender, that man is the Stoic in action. Not the man on the good days. The man on the hard days who comes back anyway. If you are watching the Stoic Edge and you have been here before, if you have tried to build this kind of life and found yourself back at the beginning, this is your call to come back one more time. Not with the naive confidence that this time will be perfect. With the mature understanding that the return itself is the practice. Subscribe to this channel right now and let it be part of what you come back to. Every week, this channel is adding another stone to the citadel you are building. Let it be here when the hard days come, because they will come, and you will need something real to return to. Living with intention every single day. Intention is the thread that connects the philosophical understanding of Stoicism to the daily reality of living it. Without intention, without the daily, deliberate choice to apply these principles to the specific texture of your actual life, Stoicism remains a beautiful and inert collection of ideas. The man who understands Stoicism but does not practice it has acquired something impressive for his mind and useless for his life. The man who practices it imperfectly but consistently is building something real. He is living with intention, and intentional living is the most direct path to the focused growth this year demands. Living with intention means beginning each day with a choice, the explicit, conscious decision to be a man of a specific quality on this specific day. Not a general aspiration to be better, but a concrete commitment to express a particular virtue in a particular way. Today I will be patient when I am provoked. Today I will complete the work I have been avoiding. Today I will speak honestly when silence would be more comfortable. Today I will honor the commitment I made to my body. These are not grand declarations. They are small, precise intentions that give the day direction before the day has a chance to give you its own. The man who begins each day with that kind of intentionality lives differently than the man who simply reacts to whatever the day brings. Marcus Aurelius described a way of living that he called living in accordance with nature, and by nature, he did not mean the outdoors. He meant the deep nature of a rational, social, purposeful human being. The man who lives in accordance with his nature is the man who uses his capacity for reason to guide his actions, who engages fully with his responsibilities to others, and who pursues his growth with the seriousness that a man's potential deserves. This is living with intention at its fullest expression. Not a series of self-improvement tactics, but a complete reorientation of your existence around the things that are genuinely worth living for. This year, let every day be an act of intention. Not a perfect day, an intentional one. There is a profound difference. The perfect day is a fantasy that becomes the enemy of the good day. The intentional day is always available, always achievable, and always building toward the man you are becoming. It does not require favorable circumstances, high energy, or the absence of difficulty. It requires only the daily choice to engage your life with purpose rather than drift through it on the current of habit and reaction. That choice, made every morning, is the sum total of what the Stoic life asks of you. And what it gives you in return is a life worth examining, worth building, and worth the full investment of your one irreplaceable time on earth. The gift you give the next generation. There is a dimension of focused growth that extends beyond your own lifetime, and the Stoics were acutely aware of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the responsibility of the present man to the future, about the kind of world, the kind of culture, the kind of example that the serious man leaves behind as his legacy. He understood that the quality of a man's character does not stay contained within his own life. It radiates outward. It shapes the people around him, the environments he inhabits, and the younger people who observe him and form their understanding of what is possible and what is admirable. You are, right now, the model for someone younger than you. A son, a nephew, a younger colleague, a neighbor's child, or the young man at the edge of your social circle who is watching how you navigate difficulty, how you handle failure, how you treat people who cannot do anything for you, and whether the standards you claim to hold are ones you actually live. He is watching whether the man who talks about growth actually grows. He is watching whether the man who talks about discipline actually holds his standard when it costs him something. He is watching whether the Stoic principles you have encountered are reshaping your behavior or merely decorating your conversation. This is not a pressure meant to paralyze you. It is a purpose meant to fuel you. When your own motivation runs thin, when the discipline feels mechanical and the growth feels slow and the purpose feels abstract, remember that your example is not abstract to the people watching it. It is the most concrete and powerful thing you can offer the world. Not your opinions. Not your advice. Your life. The daily, observable, imperfect but honest record of a man who chose growth over comfort, focus over distraction, virtue over ease, and who kept choosing it even when it was hard. Seneca wrote that philosophy, properly lived, is a gift to the future. The man who builds his character with Stoic discipline is not building it for himself alone. He is demonstrating, in the language that transcends words, the language of example, that the examined life is possible, that the disciplined life is sustainable, and that the focused life is genuinely more alive than the scattered one. That demonstration will outlast him. It will influence people he will never meet, in ways he will never know, long after the specifics of his biography have been forgotten. This is the ultimate argument for taking your growth seriously. Not because you deserve it, though you do. Because the world that forms in the wake of your example deserves the best version of you that honest effort can produce. Your commitment to the Stoic Edge. You have come to the end of this script, but you have not come to the end of the work. The work does not have an end. It has a direction, always forward, always toward the man of greater wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance that your practice is building. You began this content as you were. You will end it as you are, which is exactly the same as when you began, unless you make the decision to carry these ideas into the days ahead with genuine intention. The words themselves are inert. Your application of them is everything. The Stoic Edge exists for this reason, to give you the philosophical fuel required for a life of focused, intentional, dignified growth. Not a life free of difficulty. Not a life of perpetual inspiration. A real life, lived by a real man, fortified by the deepest wisdom the human tradition has produced. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca are not historical curiosities. They are contemporaries in the most important sense, men whose understanding of the human condition is as accurate and applicable today as it was when they first committed it to writing. The challenges they faced are yours. The wisdom they discovered is available to you. If this channel is doing what it is designed to do, if these ideas are landing, if they are producing something real in the way you think about your days, your choices, and your potential, then this is your moment. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now. Hit that notification bell so that every new piece of content reaches you directly. Share this video with the man in your life who needs it, the one who is searching for something that makes his life make more sense, who is capable of more than his current circumstances suggest, and who simply needs the right framework to organize his best intentions into consistent action. Be the reason he found this channel. The Stoic Edge is forged in silence. Built for men who are serious. Grown one principle, one practice, one honest day at a time. Welcome to the work. It never ends. And that is the whole point. The Stoic map for the year ahead. Every serious endeavor requires a map. Not a rigid, inflexible plan that crumbles at the first unexpected obstacle. The Stoics were too practical for that. But a directional map, a clear understanding of where you are going, what principles will guide you through the terrain between those 2 points, and what you will do when the road becomes unclear. The Stoic map for focused growth in 2026 has been laid out throughout this script, but it is worth drawing the lines together in a final, clear survey. You begin with the interior. Before you change a single external circumstance, you do the work of clarifying your values, not in abstract terms but in concrete behavioral terms. Not, I value discipline, but, I will be in bed by 10, awake by 5, and at work before the world has a chance to distract me. Not, I value honesty, but, I will tell the difficult truth in the conversation I have been avoiding for 3 months. Values that are not expressed as specific behaviors are wishes, not commitments. The Stoic map begins with this translation, from principle to practice, from philosophy to action. From the interior, the map moves outward to your environment. You audit your physical space, your digital environment, your social circle, and your daily schedule with the same forensic honesty that the Stoics brought to every dimension of life. You identify what is supporting your growth, and what is undermining it. You make changes, not all at once, not with the dramatic gesture that tends to collapse under its own weight, but systematically and sustainably. One environment changed well is worth more than 10 environments changed impulsively and abandoned within a week. From the environment, the map moves to your habits, the daily practices that are the actual building blocks of the man you are becoming. The morning premeditation, the evening review, the physical practice, the intellectual investment in the wisdom tradition, the practice of silence, and the practice of honest speech. These habits are not impressive individually. They are transformative collectively, compounding over the 365 days of this year into a character that is genuinely, measurably different from the one that began the year. The Stoic map does not promise a miracle. It describes a mechanism. And the mechanism works if you work it. The quiet revolution of the focused man. History is full of loud revolutions, dramatic public upheavals that announce themselves with force and leave wreckage in their wake. The Stoics were interested in a different kind of revolution entirely. They were interested in the quiet revolution, the internal transformation that occurs in a man who decides, without announcement, to change the fundamental quality of his engagement with his own life. This revolution does not make the news. It does not produce a moment of dramatic public declaration. It happens in the small hours of the morning, in the privacy of a man's own choices, in the accumulation of days in which he was, by even the smallest margin, better than the day before. The quiet revolution of the focused man is the most underrated force in human development. It is underrated precisely because it is invisible in its early stages. The man who begins his morning practice, his evening review, his physical discipline, and his intentional silence will not look dramatically different at the end of the first week. He will not feel dramatically different at the end of the first month. The changes are real, but they are subterranean, building in the deep structure of his character, in the neural pathways that are being rewired by repeated practice, in the small stores of confidence and self-knowledge that are accumulating with each day he honors his commitment. The man who judges these early stages by their visible results will almost always quit too soon. The man who understands the mechanism trusts the process and stays. By the end of the year, the quiet revolution will be undeniable. Not just to the people around the growing man, to himself. He will stand in December and look back at January and recognize that the man who started this year and the man who is finishing it are separated by a genuine and profound distance. Not the distance of dramatic events or external windfalls, the distance of daily, honest, unglamorous work. The kind of distance that can only be covered one day at a time, and that cannot be faked, purchased, or shortcut. This is the revolution the Stoics lived and died believing in. It is the revolution available to you right now, in this moment, with everything you already have. The only question is whether you will begin it. Seneca wrote that it is never too late to begin the study of wisdom, and never too soon. He wrote this to a man who was already in middle age, already established in his life, already past the point where most men believe significant change is possible. And yet Seneca's answer was clear: begin now. Not next year. Not after the circumstances improve. Not once you feel ready, because the feeling of readiness is a luxury that the man serious about growth cannot afford to wait for. You begin now, with whatever is true about your life today, in whatever condition your character currently exists, from whatever distance you currently stand from the man you intend to become. The step taken from where you are is the only step that can be taken. Take it. Forging identity through repeated action. The Stoics understood something that modern psychology has only recently confirmed with scientific language: identity is not something you discover, it is something you build. The man who waits to feel like a disciplined person before behaving like one will wait indefinitely. The man who behaves like a disciplined person, consistently, even before it feels natural, even before the identity has fully crystallized, eventually becomes one. This is not manipulation of the self. It is the correct understanding of how character actually forms. It forms through action, not through intention. Through behavior, not through aspiration. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in terms of habit and second nature, the observation that a man's repeated actions become his character, and his character becomes his fate. The word fate in this context does not mean a predetermined destiny imposed from outside. It means the natural consequence of the man he has become. The man whose character is defined by discipline will naturally produce disciplined outcomes. The man whose character is defined by focused attention will naturally produce focused results. The man whose character is defined by honest engagement will naturally attract honest relationships. Character is not the modifier of results, it is the cause of them. This year, your task is identity construction. Every morning when you rise before you want to, you are laying a brick. Every evening when you sit with the honest review of your day rather than numbing out, you are laying a brick. Every time you protect your focused work from the incursion of the trivial, you are laying a brick. Every time you tell the truth when lying would be easier, you are laying a brick. These bricks are not visible individually. But the structure they are building is the most important one you will ever construct. The architecture of a man who can be trusted, by others and above all by himself, to be exactly who he claims to be. Epictetus taught that the philosopher does not merely speak the truth, he is the truth. His philosophy is not a costume he puts on for conversations about ideas and removes when returning to ordinary life. It is the ordinary life itself, the daily texture of how he moves through the world, how he treats the people in front of him, how he handles the small provocations and the large ones, how he behaves in the moments no one is watching. This is the standard. Not perfection, presence. Not the performance of virtue, but the steady, practiced, imperfect but genuine attempt to actually live it. That attempt, sustained across this year, will forge an identity that no circumstance can take from you. The standard you set for yourself tonight. Everything in this script comes down to one moment, not the moment of watching it, not the moment of feeling inspired by it, but the moment tonight when you make a quiet decision about who you are going to be from here. Not a loud decision. Not a declaration posted anywhere. A private, interior commitment made in the silence of your own honest self-reckoning. The Stoics placed enormous value on this kind of interior commitment because they understood that it is the only commitment that truly holds, not the one made for an audience, not the one made in the heat of motivation, but the one made in calm clarity, with full awareness of what it will cost and what it will produce. The standard you set for yourself tonight is the compass for every day that follows. If you set it low, if you tell yourself that the principles in this script are admirable but probably not for a man with your specific circumstances, responsibilities, and history, then the compass is pointed at the same destination you have already visited. If you set it honestly, if you acknowledge the gap between where you are and where you could be, and then commit to closing that gap with daily, patient, intentional effort, then the compass is pointed somewhere genuinely new. Somewhere that the undirected version of your life will never reach, but the intentional one can. Seneca wrote one final thing that belongs here. He wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. That the hardships we anticipate are almost always worse in the fearing of them than in the actual living through them. The discipline is not as painful as the imagination of discipline makes it. The honest conversation is not as difficult as the avoidance of it. The early morning is not as brutal as the dread of it. The commitment is not as costly as the fear of the commitment. Most of what stands between the man you are and the man you are capable of being is not an actual obstacle, it is the imagined weight of one. You will not know this until you begin. And once you begin, you will wonder what you were waiting for. Set the standard tonight. Begin tomorrow. Return to it every day after. The Stoic Edge will be here every week to remind you what you are building and why. Subscribe, stay close, and let the work speak for itself. One final word from Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the closing pages of the Meditations, something that has served as the final word of Stoic philosophy for nearly 2,000 years. He wrote that it is enough to do good now, even if you will not remember it. Even if no one sees it. Even if it produces no reward that the world can measure. It is enough to do good now. This is the complete Stoic answer to the question of how to live, with full presence, full integrity, full investment in the quality of this moment's action, independent of what anyone else is doing, thinking, or rewarding. Your growth in 2026 is not measured by how many people notice it. It is not measured by what your bank account says at the end of December. It is not measured by the opinions of people who do not know the cost of what you have built. It is measured in the quiet, private, absolutely real reckoning between who you were and who you became, between the man who started this year making excuses and the man who finishes it having made progress. That reckoning happens in the interior. It is witnessed only by you and the standard you set for yourself. And it is enough. More than enough. There is one more thing worth saying, and it belongs at the end because it can only be understood after everything that came before it. The Stoic life is not a sacrifice. It is not the trading of pleasure for virtue, of ease for effort, of warmth for cold philosophical principle. It is, when it is lived honestly and practiced consistently, one of the most genuinely satisfying ways a human being can exist. The man who lives with focused intention, who knows what he stands for, who spends his days building something real, who meets difficulty with preparation rather than panic, who holds his own standard in private as firmly as he holds it in public, that man does not experience life as a burden. He experiences it as a gift. A difficult, impermanent, extraordinary gift, to be used fully and wasted on nothing. Marcus Aurelius said it clearly, a man should rise above mere getting through life, and instead, live it. Not survive it. Not wait it out in the comfortable numbness of distraction and avoidance, and the endless postponement of becoming. Live it. With all the courage, clarity, patience, and honest effort that the Stoic tradition has been teaching, and that you now carry with you from this moment forward. The Stoic Edge is not just a channel. It is a commitment to the kind of content, the kind of conversation, and the kind of community that serious men need and deserve. Subscribe right now if you have not already done so. Share this video with one man in your life who is ready to hear it. And come back next week, because the work we are doing together here on the Stoic Edge is only getting deeper and more powerful. The best content this channel will ever produce has not yet been made. And neither has the best version of you. Begin today. Begin now. The Stoic Edge will be here every step of the way. The men who are watching this are not ordinary men. They are men who sought something out, who chose depth over noise, philosophy over entertainment, the long work over the quick fix. That choice is itself a signal. It tells you something important about who you already are and who you are capable of becoming. You did not arrive at this content by accident. Something in you recognized something real here, and that recognition is worth honoring with the full weight of your commitment. Not a partial commitment. Not a conditional one. The full thing. The complete decision that the Stoics demanded of themselves and that this year is demanding of you. The world needs men who have done this work. Men who have gone inward, faced what they found there, and emerged not perfect but genuinely better. More honest. More grounded. More capable of the kind of steady, patient, purposeful presence that the people in their lives need from them. That is the man the Stoic Edge is helping you build. That is the man you are becoming, starting now, one honest day at a time. The philosophy is ancient. The application is today. The result is a life you will be proud to have lived, not because it was easy, but because it was real, and because you chose it with your eyes open and your character fully engaged. That is the whole of the Stoic promise. And it has never once failed the man who gave it everything he had. The Stoic Edge, forged in silence.